Hey, welcome back to Chasing Giants TV. In this video, I'm going to show you the hunt for the buck I killed this year, 2024, that I called Zacchaeus. You guys might remember on an earlier episode of Chasing Giants TV where I showed some footage and how Zacchaeus got his name. Well, actually, it was just a few days after the release of that video that I had the buck on the ground. It all came together a whole lot quicker than what I was expected. And we're going to show you in this video exactly how it went down. So, you know, Zacchaeus is a buck that I'd known about for a couple years. I'd first seen him as a 3.5-year-old and actually passed him a few different times that season. And it was really his brow tines that made him unique. Even as a 3.5-year-old, he had long brow tines and just a little sticker coming off the front of each brow. And I think he might have even broke one of them off before that season was over. But the next summer, I got a picture of an absolute giant buck on the farm. And I just couldn't place what buck that was because I know my bucks on this farm pretty well. But this buck, he was a giant and I couldn't place him. And the more I studied pictures and you know, different angles, it was basically the 3.5-year-old buck that I'd had here with the good brows the year before, except he had absolutely exploded. Had those long brows, but now they were multiple brows on both sides. And but yet I knew he was only 4.5 years old, and as big as he was at 4.5, I just couldn't shoot him. So I let him go, and hoping that he would make it. Well, as that season rolled on, it wasn't too long, early November I think, he ended up busting off one of those long brow tines. And then about a week after that, he actually busted off the entire antler, just right there at the brow tine where that previous break was at. I was just hoping that he didn't walk past someone that was going to shoot him with one antler, basically. And you know, he did survive, and that spring, my son-in-law Corey found the one good shed antler when he was looking for shed antlers here on the farm with me. So I had that antler and was able to put a tape to it, and comparing the trail camera photos I had of Zacchaeus before he broke off that other antler, I came up with a score of about 178 inches as a 4-year-old and had high hopes for this past summer. Well, I started getting pictures of Zacchaeus about mid-July, and he had definitely put on some inches. He wasn't the 200-inch buck that I'd hoped, but I figured he was going to nudge over 190 just a little bit. And you know, I couldn't wait for season to get going. So on the morning of October 7th, I got a picture from one of my cell cams on my phone, and it was Zacchaeus going into a bedding area right at daylight. I think the picture was about 6:30 in the morning, right at daybreak. And the direction he was headed, I knew exactly where he was going to bed. He was coming into a wooded area on the farm, and there's really two distinct bedding areas, and they're real close together, and I knew he was going to be bedded in one or the other. And as the day went on, and I started thinking about where I could sit to have a chance at this buck, and with the wind direction that we had, and there was really only one stand close by that I could hunt with a northwest wind. And as the day went on, I just considered, how could I get that buck to come by that stand with a northwest wind? Hey guys, it's October 7th and I'm getting ready to head out for the afternoon hunt. I got a couple things up my sleeve for this hunt, however, and I wanted to share them with you before I head to the woods. First of all, this morning I got my new Mathews bow. I'm blessed that Mathews trusts me with their new bows before the release. This bow will be released on November 19th, I believe is the date. It's their 2025 model. It's the new Lift X bow. And like I said, I just got it this morning. I put my sight on, went out. The first arrow I shot was right on the money. I shot a few more arrows, tweaked that sight just a tiny bit, and got it shooting great, and taking this bow to the woods today, the day I got it. And folks, I have never done that before, but I felt so comfortable with this bow that it doesn't bother me one bit. The other thing that I'm going to do today that's a little bit different is I'm taking my Rattling antler with me. Now it's only October 7th, but what I'm going to be doing is setting up on the edge of a bedding area, and where I'm going to be is that there's 3 giant bur oak trees, and those bur oaks have acorns on them, and a lot of times the deer will feed under those big oak trees before they head out to the fields to feed for the evening. And again, it's real close to the bedding area, and what I'm going to do is just tickle these antlers together as I'm sitting in my stand, hope to draw those bucks out of the bedding areas nearby to those oak trees where there's been no human activity all summer. I haven't been in there at all. It's on my property, so I know there's been no human activity there. Those bucks ought to be real comfortable coming up to those giant oak trees because there's actually a good bit of ground cover under those trees as well. So got the new Mathews, gonna try a new trick, and stay tuned, we'll see how it goes. So I get in my stand and I've got those rattling antlers, and you know, rattling the first week of October is not something that most hunters would typically think to do, but it's a tactic that I've used in the past. Although it had been several years in the past, I'd seen it work, and I knew that that buck was going to be bedded within earshot of my stand, and I knew he would hear that rattling. The question was going to be, would it bring him in? So my plan was that I was going to rattle about every 30 minutes, and I started at 5 o'clock. I rattled those antlers together for, you know, maybe 45 seconds or so, and then 30 minutes later, roughly 5:30, I did it again a second time, and then about 6 o'clock, I did it again a third time. And it wasn't too long after that third rattling sequence, I could see through the brush a buck was crossing or walking through this opening. And I grabbed my binoculars as quick as I could and threw them up. And just as that buck is disappearing into the brush, I caught a glimpse of those big brows, and I knew it was the buck I was after. And what he was doing was he was circling around the location where I was at to get the wind before he came in. So I was in a big bur oak tree right on an inside corner of a cow pasture. And in front of the bur oak that I was in, there was 3 more big bur oak trees. And those trees produce acorns on a regular basis. Almost every year there's a good acorn crop. And it's fairly open under those trees. I mean, there's some weeds and stuff, but once you get out away from those trees, it's surrounded by really high and thick brush. And a lot of times those deer will pop out of that thick brush and they will feed still in the cover under those big oaks on acorns and such before they head out to food plots or fields or wherever they're going to feed, you know, later after it gets dark. And my thought was that if I rattled those antlers and I'd get the buck to think that there was a couple of other bucks already feeding and sparring under those oak trees, that Zacchaeus would come in to check it out.
Osseo Gear introduces a premium line of bow hunting gear that is unmatched. Pairing nature's finest camouflage with the best technological innovations, Osseo Gear brings whitetail bow hunters the gear they need to be the best at their craft. The unique camouflage mimics the intricate feather pattern of North America's greatest predatory creatures. Designed for invisibility, built for comfort, and engineered for function. Visit OsseoGear.com. That's ASIO Gear.com to start shopping. Osseo Gear, prepare to be invisible.
Well, that's what he was doing. I was seeing him circle, but he wanted to come into those big oaks with the wind in his face. And luckily I was set up just perfect that my wind, he was just missing my scent as he come in. And guys, I gotta admit, I'm not a good cameraman. I totally blew it on getting footage of this shot, and it's 100% my fault. I can't lay it on anybody. Steve Shields has been on me for years to learn how to use my camera, and he said someday it's gonna cost me some good footage, and this was the buck that it happened on. And I had my camera set on manual instead of auto. I was trying to learn to use those manual settings, and I had my aperture setting wrong, and it's plenty light for me to shoot, but I'm looking at my screen and it's black, and I didn't know what to do, so I just hit the record button, and I don't think I got much, but I'm telling you, it was plenty. It wasn't quitting time yet. There was plenty of shooting light, and made a hit just a little bit back. He was walking as I shot, and I got back about 6 inches farther than what I wanted. What really bothered me is after the shot, Zacchaeus ran straight away from me for about 60 yards, and he just stood there with his butt towards me, and I couldn't see his side, so I couldn't see the wound on his side exactly where I hit. And he just stood there for a few minutes, and he wasn't even dropping his head or anything. He was just standing there alert, and after a few minutes he just walked away into the thick brush, and I was a little bit worried about the shot. In fact, I was very concerned about the shot, to be honest. So the next day, or that night, I called in a bunch of friends to help me the next day, because I thought it was going to be an all-out grid search or something, and Even had my friend Lee Mitchell bring his dog along, who's tracked several deer in the past. And you know, it wasn't too long. We could not find blood, and we was just kind of on a grid search. And my good friend Joe Johnson said, "Here's blood." And they brought the dog over, and literally when that dog got on that blood, it probably wasn't 5 minutes, and he was right on the deer. The deer was, he probably went 100 to 125 or so yards from where I'd shot him, maybe a little bit more than that, maybe 150 yards from where I shot him, and laying there dead. And he looked like he'd expired, you know, right after I shot. Probably before I got out of my tree stand, that buck was laying dead on the ground, but I played it safe. And you know, sharing moments like that with good friends is really special. Besides Lee Mitchell and Joe Johnson, who I mentioned, Al Foster was there. Had Wes Delks, the prodigy, he was there. He drove all the way from Indiana to be there. Kyle Harmon from Team Radical Outdoors was there running the video camera and got some photos after the hunt. But you know, one of the best things about shooting these big deer for me has become calling the friends to help me recover him. And you know, even if I see the buck fall, I'm going out and I'm going to call some friends to help me get him out. Now, I don't need help dragging because I bring in the skid loader on my farm. We pick them up that way. There's no dragging here. I'm going to take that skid loader wherever we got to go to get that buck and drop the bucket and roll him in it, and away we go. But it's just sharing those moments with friends that makes it really special. So guys, I know this hunt is not real entertaining because I didn't get the shot on video, and that's 100% my fault. But you know, I'm still learning just like every other deer hunter out there. I don't claim to know it all, but there's several takeaways from this hunt that I want to share with you. This is, again, it's not an entertaining hunt because I didn't get the shot on video, but I think there's a chance for some real education here that could help you with a lot of different things. And let's start with the shot. You know, this is the second year in a row that I shot a buck as he was walking and my hit was just a little bit back. And that's just an issue I have. You know, there's some guys that have target panic. I don't have target panic, but I just don't think to stop the buck. And when he's coming within my shooting lane or where I want to shoot him, I just go into autopilot. I pull back and I get that pin on where I want to hit and I release. And as he's moving, I usually end up hitting him a little bit farther back. That's something I need to work on. I need to start stopping those bucks, either whistle or grunt or something, just to get him to lock up and while I'm already at full draw and take my shot then. So again, I'm learning like everybody else. I've got bad habits I'm trying to break. Some things that went right. You know, when I shot that buck and I seen his reaction to the shot, that worried me. The fact that deer would stand there and act like he's not even hit when I knew I hit him, and then slowly walk off into the brush, not hanging his head or anything, really concerned me. So I sit there for a good 30 minutes after that deer walked off. I mean, it was dark when I got down, and I didn't even walk over and look at my arrow. My arrow had a lighted knock. I seen it there in the ground lit up. I didn't even walk over and look at that. I just slipped out. Guys, when it comes to recovering deer, you almost have to get them in that first bed. If you jump them from that first bed, your odds of recovering that deer go way down. And that's probably what happened if I'd have jumped right on his trail. Now, I don't believe he lived very long just based on the sign that I seen, the distance he traveled. There was not multiple beds. There was one bed that he was laying in. But, you know, back out, get some help, come back the next day. You know, I was so concerned that I brought a dog in before we got on the track because I didn't want, you know, a half a dozen of us to be scouring the woods and leaving human scent everywhere and, you know, possibly disturbing this deer's trail. When we found the first sign, blood, whatever it may be, I wanted that dog on the track. And, you know, we started with that arrow that was in the ground, getting that dog to sniff that arrow and take off, and he was having some trouble with that track. You got to remember, there's a lot of deer in this area, and I just think he was having a hard time staying on this one deer. But once we found that blood, he was off to the races. And like I said, it didn't take 5 minutes till he found that. But you got to be patient. After you make the shot, unless you see that deer fall, you're way better to back out and come back with help than to jump right on that track. Guys, what I really want to do with this video is share with you the strategy that I used to kill this buck. And you know, Steve Shields can work magic with his graphics, and he's going to help us here. as he lays out the scene. So, you know, that morning I got this buck's picture, cell cameras. You know, I've said in the past, I think we even had a episode on the Chasing Giants podcast about cell cams seem to spook bucks more than non-cell cams. That doesn't mean that cell cams don't have their place. I use them, I've got a dozen of them, and it just so happened that that morning I caught Zacchaeus on one of my cell cams going into a bedding area that I knew very well. And by the direction that buck was heading and the time of that photo, I knew where he was going to bed that day. You got to learn your properties that you're hunting, and you know where those bucks are going to be bedded. And I knew that he was in one of two bedding locations, and I knew no matter which one of those two that he was going to be in, he could hear me rattle. It was a fairly calm day, and there was no doubt he was going to hear me banging those antlers together. The only question was he going to come into him? I played the wind. I never give up the wind. You cannot give up the wind. I had other stands in close proximity to these bedding areas, but the wind was wrong for them, and I did not take a chance. I would have rather not shot Zacchaeus on that evening than I would to go in and bump him, because if I went in and bumped him and spooked him, he's not going to be bedding there much longer. He's going to find another spot, maybe on my farm, but it might be on the neighbors a mile away. When it comes to these big deer, you don't take chances with the wind. That's a lesson that you guys need to take to heart. So I had one stand that I could hunt with that wind. My thought was all day long was, how do I get that buck to come past that stand? Because I knew the odds were very low of that happening. Rattling in the early season. This is not the first time that I've had that work. Now, I'm not out there banging those antlers like it's the rut, trying to imitate two big mature bucks trying to kill each other. I was just trying to imitate a couple of medium bucks sparring under those big oak trees where the deer like to feed on the acorns anyway. And my hope was that Zacchaeus, laying in his bed, would hear those bucks sparring, and he would know it was around those bur oak trees, and that would be enough to bring him out of his bed just a few minutes early and up that direction. That's exactly what he did, but here's another point I want to really drive home. That buck was actually to the northwest of me with a northwest wind, and he didn't just march in with the wind at his back. That buck circled in the brush, and I happened to catch that one glimpse of him to know this is exactly what happened. He circled in the brush, and when he come around to those giant bur oak trees, he had the wind at his advantage. I was just off to the side enough to make it all work. So guys, that rattling in early November, or early October rather, it can absolutely work, but the key is you got to be close to that buck. You're not going to drag him in from a quarter mile away by just banging as hard as you can. You need to be within about 100 yards or so of that bedded buck, and your goal is to get him on his feet just a little bit early and make him come in your direction instead of another direction. Not the first time I've seen it work, and it's probably not going to be the last time I try this trick, but it worked like a charm on this hunt. So here's one last point that I want to make, guys. This is the second year in a row that I got my target buck's picture on a cell cam in the morning right at daylight, and then went in that afternoon to kill him and got the job done. When you get those pictures of those mature bucks right at daylight at this time of the year, you are very close to where he's bedded, and you need to get in there that very afternoon, and you need to play the wind but get as close as you can. It's worked 2 years in a row for me, and you can bet that I'll be watching those trail cameras coming into my phone every season, especially that early season, because if I catch him at daylight, I know he's bedded really, really close, and I know exactly where I need to be hunting that evening. You know, shooting a buck on October 7th, early in the season, first week of the season, it's kind of bittersweet because I was looking forward to chasing this buck for a month and a half, 2 months before closing the deal, but you just never know. Yeah, I had a lot of people say, Don, you make it look easy first week of the season. You tag this giant buck, how do you do it? And guys, I don't think people understand how much preparation goes into these hunts. Yeah, I make it look easy because you see a 20-minute video of the hunt or hear the story on the podcast for 10 minutes. There's hours and months and weeks and years of preparation that goes into all this, and when the buck shows up and does what I'm expecting him to do at some point in the season, I'm ready to roll. I didn't have to go in there with a stand on my back and hang the stand. That stand was in place. I didn't need to go in there, you know, pre-season scouting, looking for big rubs and stuff. I know the property. I know where those bucks are going to be bedded. And it's taken years to get there and to get the farm set up. Today, when a buck shows up on my farm, I feel that I can kill any buck that shows up here. And it's just a matter of experience, but it's also a matter of preparation. And that's one of the things that you know, we want to do with Chasing Giants TV is we want to educate you, help you to become a better hunter. But like I said, I'm still learning as well. I'm still making mistakes, and I'm humble enough to share those mistakes with you. And you know, hopefully you're not making the same ones that I'm making. But just encourage you to subscribe to our channel. Yes, stay tuned. We're going to have a lot more videos just like this one in the coming months and years, and appreciate your support.